Redeemer, well, welcome back for week 2 in our Worth It series, and really appreciative of you gathering together relationally. And I'm going to trust that we're learning to have the one another's that the Scripture talks about, over 100 times in the New Testament, where we're learning to love one another, forgive one another, and so many of the relational elements of Christianity that are so clear in the New Testament, I think are going to be best lived out with exactly what you're doing and the relational context that you're forming, being a gospel-centered missional family of disciples making disciples. And it may not feel like the world's being set on fire whenever you gather together, but it's really important and it's beautiful to Jesus, and the fact that you're entrusting these relationships and this time together as you meet to the Lord is a beautiful thing. It means a lot to me. It means a lot to Him. Here's the specific area we're going to be tackling in the Scripture today, is that there's a text in 2 Corinthians chapter 8 and 9 that is talking about these Macedonians and this grace of giving that they were giving to some specific needs. And a couple things that I want to highlight for this discussion. I think this text is really challenging because these were not wealthy folks. And I think that can be sometimes how it feels when money is talked about in relation to the church and for these kind of generosity conversations, is that sometimes it can feel like really what matters is, do I get to a certain threshold? Do I give a certain amount? And then if you give a certain amount, that means you're generous. And if you give a less amount, then you probably need to get your act together. And that God may even be frustrated at you. And perhaps there have been some tough things that have happened in your life recently. Maybe there's been a divorce. Maybe there's been a really hard thing. Maybe you've been laid off from your job. There could be a million things, and you could feel like you're being disobedient. But the reality, or you could feel like you're obedient because there's a certain threshold that you've got a direct deposit lined up, and you don't ever think about it. It just happens. The thing that's really interesting from this scripture here with these Macedonian Christians is that they did not have a lot. So the point wasn't if they got over a minimum threshold, but instead that what did generosity look like for them? And apparently, from God's viewpoint, these people were, with whatever they had, were incredibly generous. And what the lesson is of this, and this is where this conversation for you will go, is how much motive matters. And I think that it'll be really interesting to pair motive with actual giving, and for you guys to talk that through and how much motive matters. And I think it'd be interesting for you to share if there may have been some times where maybe you were giving an amount that if someone would have known, they would have said, oh yeah, you're good to go. But in your heart, you knew that you were withholding a lot and that it wasn't actually a generous amount for you. I've had lots of conversations leading up to the sermon series with people that have said, yeah, I've been just been on autopilot with this for a good long while, and I really haven't thought about it. I really haven't looked at my expenses. I haven't really looked at my income, and I just kind of felt good about it. But the reality is I haven't examined it in a bit. That might be you, or there may be some of you that you look back and you're like, man, I was given such a small amount, but whenever I did give, I knew that it was generous to me, and I felt like the Lord formed. I had several people that have mentioned this, that some decisions they made early on in their adulthood, maybe early on in their marriage, really formed decades of obedience in this area, and that how much motive matters along with dollar amounts. So talk that through, how motive matters. Something else that I think will be a really important conversation, especially as it relates to being a gospel-centered missional family, is just to talk about the gospel message of God's generosity to you in sending His only Son, died on the cross, resurrected from the dead, and how God's generosity towards you in sending His only Son and providing for you in every way, emotionally, physically, spiritually, like what impact has that had on you? And yes, He's provided for you financially, but I'm talking more importantly, your soul, your salvation. And I'd love for you to reflect on that, the way that God's generosity has impacted your experience in life and your spiritual life itself. And then you may well want to talk about how that's impacted and how that could impact your financial generosity too. They're just so related, aren't they? It'd be really hard to say you've really experienced the spiritual generosity of the Lord, and yet I'm going to hold on to my resources and not help other people and not reflect that generosity to others. So again, be honest as you can in a way that would be appropriate on ways that's worked and not worked for you. And I think this could be a really high yield conversation, and it means a lot that you'd be willing to lean into it and love and serve one another.